Hey everyone. So, you've probably been hearing this term a lot in the news lately. The axis of resistance. It's this whole network of Iran-backed groups that are really shaking things up in the Middle East, challenging both the US and Israel. Today, we're going to break down what it is, who's in it, and how it all connects.
I mean, it really feels like everything's happening at once, right? You've got groups in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Iraq, all hitting Israeli and U.S. targets. So the big question is, are these just a bunch of separate incidents, or is there a thread connecting them all? That's the puzzle we're going to solve right now.
All right, first up, let's look at what's actually happening on the ground. We're calling this a coordinated challenge.
The whole region is basically on a knife's edge. You've got Houthi forces in Yemen launching drones and missiles at ships in the Red Sea. Up in Lebanon, Hezbollah and Israel are trading fire almost daily. Meanwhile, in Iraq and Syria, militias have hit U.S. bases over and over again, and the U.S. has hit back. It's this incredibly tangled web of conflicts stretching across thousands of miles. So, what's the common denominator here? What ties all these different fronts together? Well, that brings us to our next part. Mapping the axis. And here it is, the axis of resistance. At its core, it's an alliance. It's made up of different militias and even some governments that are all backed in one way or another by Iran. And according to our sources, they share one big goal: to push back against American and Israeli power in the Middle East.
So who are we talking about exactly? Well, Iran is the main backer. They provide the money, the training, the weapons. Then you have Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is often seen as Iran's most successful and powerful partner. There's Hamas and Islamic Jihad in the Palestinian territories, the Houthis in Yemen, Assad's government in Syria, and a whole collection of militant groups in Iraq. They're all part of this network.
Now, for Iran, this network is a huge strategic win. Why? Because it basically creates a land bridge of influence stretching all the way from Tehran to the Mediterranean Sea. This allows Iran to move weapons and people, project its power, and maybe most importantly, fight its enemies without the fighting ever happening on its own soil.
But that's the what. What about the why? Why does this alliance even exist in the first place? Turns out there are two really different ways of looking at it.
Okay, so perspective A basically says this was all Iran's idea. After the 1979 revolution, Iran's new leaders wanted to export their ideology, so they created this network of proxies to fight their battles for them. But perspective B tells a completely different story. It says this wasn't some top-down plan. It argues these groups grew organically from the ground up as a reaction to decades of foreign occupation and policies that left local people feeling powerless.
To dig a little deeper into that second view, the journalist Rami Curry calls this a century-long conflict. He frames it as a response to what he calls a settler colonial assault on Palestinian rights backed by the West. From this angle, the axis isn't just an Iranian invention, it's a symptom of much, much deeper historical problems in the region. And the birth of Hezbollah is a perfect example of how these two views can kind of merge. You had this marginalized Shia community in Lebanon, then Iran's revolution creates a powerful new Shia leader in the region, and then Israel invades Lebanon in 1982. It was like a perfect storm. Iran saw an opportunity, stepped in with money and training, and helped create Hezbollah. It really shows how local anger and outside support can come together to create something incredibly powerful. Okay, so we've talked about the why. Now let's get into the how. What is their actual strategy? The key concept to understand here is proxy armies. This is Iran's whole playbook. Instead of fighting a direct war with, say, the US or Israel, which would be devastating, it supports these other groups. They fight on Iran's behalf, pushing its agenda forward, but Iran's own soldiers stay off the front lines. And the impact of this strategy is huge. Just get this. The Pentagon says that in the 2 months after October 7th, these militias hit U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria with almost 100 separate rocket and drone attacks. That is more than one attack every single day. But, and this is a big but, it seems like they're being very careful. The Wall Street Journal points out that these are calculated and strategic strikes. They're designed to apply pressure, to show they can't be ignored, but they seem to be stopping just short of anything that could spark a massive all-out war with Israel and its allies. And you know what? It's working, in a way. Rami Curry makes the point that groups like Hamas and Hezbollah have gotten so good militarily that they can actually check or deter action from some of the most powerful militaries in the world. They've become a real force to be reckoned with. So all of this leads to the million-dollar question. Where is this all going? What happens next?
Well, despite all the tension and all the attacks, the general feeling among the analysts we're looking at is that nobody actually wants a huge regional war. Not Iran, not its allies, not the US, not Israel. The danger, of course, is that something could happen by accident that spirals out of control, but for now, it seems like everyone is trying to avoid that.
And this might be the real takeaway. The Axis's power might be evolving. As Rami Corey puts it, we might start seeing its power show up more politically rather than just militarily. So less about what happens on the battlefield and more about what happens at the negotiating table and in the future political map of the region.
Which leaves us with one final big question to chew on. What we're seeing is a coordinated network that can stand up to superpowers and really influence what happens in the Middle East. So is this a temporary thing, or are we witnessing a permanent shift in who holds the power in the region? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me.